In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Today is the eve, the day before, the festival of St. Francis of Assisi, one of the greatly influential and astonishing figures, really, of religious history. And so I think it is appropriate that we devote our little sermonette, or whatever it might be called, homily, to him. From time to time, under a variety of circumstances, there appear in the world special individuals who seem to have come for a purpose. And whose purpose often is to revive the spiritual life in their circumstances and in their time, and who often create great historical changes, especially in the thinking of segments of humanity at that particular time. Such was the case with Francis of Assisi, or Francesco Bernardoni, which was his secular name, who lived with his parents in a little town called Assisi, which I think is sort of in the northern part of Italy, and which a few years ago had suffered a terrible earthquake which very greatly damaged the Cathedral of St. Francis. So let's say holy places are not immune from unholy events, let us say. Now, just to place him within a historical context, it was a time when the Church in the West had been under very difficult internal circumstances. There was really a great deal of degeneration, shall we say, among the clergy and the monastic orders, a great deal of corruption, a great deal of laxity in religious terms, and just sort of altogether a bad period. And at this time, Francis's father, Signore Bernardoni, took a trip. He was a cloth merchant. He took a trip to what now is the south of France, and at that time was the Languedoc, but already very much connected with France. And while there, he met a young local lady, and he married her, and the result of that marriage was Francis. And in fact, the word Francis or Francesco, I don't believe existed before that time. But since his mother was French, the locals called him the little Frenchman, Francesco. And the little Frenchman grew up to be a grown-up Frenchman, and he was from very early age on an ecstatic and a partaker of visions, and a very unusual man. At a certain point in his life, he was already a grown man by then, he had the inspiration that he should go see the Pope. Now the Pope was Innocent III, whose name is a little bit ironic because he was the one who preached the Albigensian Crusade, and let's say was not a man very favorable to the Gnosis, but he was still subject to inspiration, and so he dreamt that a strange man would come to the door, and it would be very important for him to talk to that strange man. Well, upon awakening in the morning, his chamberlains came to him and said, "Well, Holy Father, there's a strange man out by the door, and he wears sort of tattered clothes. He doesn't smell very good." If they knew that term, they would have said he's some kind of a hippie. Well, Innocent remembered the dreams and let the man come in. And then he spoke with him, and Francis spoke to him, and it became evident that this was a very unusual visionary man of very good intentions and of a very close connection to the divine. And so Innocent gave him permission to start a fraternity of monks, who subsequently became the Franciscan monks. I think that actually the Franciscan tradition, like usual, split into several, and there are the Franciscans, there are the Minorites, and there are the, something else, the something else, that would be an interesting name to have. No, the others are the Capucines. They all come from the tradition of Saint Francis. And by way of these associations of monks, he promoted a colossal change and new inspiration in the very much deteriorated Catholic Church. The principal, probably the principal feature having been is that he forbade his monks, not only the monks but the monasteries, the institutions themselves, to own any property. That's kind of hard to do if you have to have a house within which the monks live and have to have a church where they say Mass, and yet they can't own any property. But you know, the Italians are very resourceful people, and they found some way of doing that. In any event, as the result of his inspiration to the people, there was a growing revival of religious life, not only in Italy, but all over Western Christendom. And it might be said that probably his influence saved the Catholic Church, in spite of all of its difficulties. Now, there are all kinds of legends and statements and fantasies about Saint Francis, because he was such an outstanding and unusual individual. If you take a look at some really authoritative and big book about the lives of the saints, like Butler's Lives of the Saints, which is 2 huge volumes, you will find pages and pages and pages of all the legends and all the stories that accumulated about Saint Francis, probably more than any other saint. And among them are the ones that sort of in the public mind connected him with the animals. There is no real historical proof that Saint Francis was all involved with animals. But there is one story that he sent out word that he was going to give a sermon out in the open air, and nobody came. It's an unpleasant experience for a preacher, I can tell you that. So there he was. So he went out on the shore of a little lake and he started preaching. And the birds gathered and presumably listened to his sermon. I'm so fond of puns that I'm very tempted to say something, but I'm not going to. In any event, there was and I think there was another similar legend that the fish stuck their heads out of the lake and were listening to Saint Francis. Those are probable, but also he gathered men who wanted to join his fraternity of monks, and he would give the new monks animal names. Now that is rather unusual. For instance, there was one man who became one of his monks who had been a highwayman, a brigand, briganti, bandito, and so Saint Francis named him Brother Wolf, because he had been preying on people before, and various things that so obviously these were all indications of some sort of at least a symbolic connection that Francis had with animals. So it became a folk custom to on the day, or in our case today, a day before, to have a special blessing for the animals and some prayers for the animals on this day, which is, I think, quite in order. And I think the relationship, I'll say a little more about it in a minute, let's say of the human kingdom to the animal kingdom is an important issue. Let us say that it was many different elements of teaching and of practice which Saint Francis has brought in became normative and important in the church. Now when we are moving toward Christmas, and at Christmas time you are going to see many creches, which are little reproductions of the manger wherein Christ is born, and of Joseph and Mary, and sometimes of the shepherds, and sometimes of the three magi, and the first such creche was erected apparently by Saint Francis for the people to have a tangible representation of the mystery of the Nativity. So here he did a great deal. Now with his devoting his life to religion in a somewhat unusual way didn't sit very well with his father, for instance, who wanted him to become a cloth merchant like he was. And he was tormenting young Francis quite a bit about that. You are a merchant and you should be here helping me sell the cloth and so forth, and not do all these weird things. And right now you are wearing the clothing that was made out of the fabric that I have sold, but you don't want to work in my store. What's the matter with you? This sort of thing. So Francis did something dramatic. He got out on the main piazza in Assisi. He took off all his clothes until he was totally naked, and threw his clothes on the ground and said, "Here, Father, I give you back all that you gave me. This is what God gave me, is my body." Father wasn't all that happy, I understand. So he was a very unusual and very dramatic person. Interestingly enough, he was never ordained a priest. He didn't want to be ordained a priest. I think not very long ago, some obscure historical material surfaced that he had taken holy orders up to and including the subdiaconate, but that was it. And of course, miracles occurred in his presence. He was a recipient of the stigmata on his body, as many others have right including Padre Pio in more recent times, who is greatly revered in Italy now, and so forth. But let us say his influence, his interest in poverty, his dedication that people who are in church should not be materialistic, should not accept money. Even in my days, I don't know how things are now, but in one of our residences of my parents in the south of Hungary, now Serbia, very close to our house, a big Franciscan church. And there, St. Francis's memory not greatly revered, and the Franciscan monks would come around, especially since they only had to take about 20 steps over to our house. They came, like the Buddhists, begging monks, and they were, whatever they received was mostly food, money, things like that. They took it back to the monastery. They were not allowed to keep any of it themselves. This was the vow of holy poverty. Also, let's say the whole organizational structure of the Franciscan order which St. Francis instituted, was a great change from the previous one, because the order, the rules by which the monks lived prior to St. Francis were all modifications of the rules instituted by St. Benedict. St. Benedict of Nursia, who also was in Italy, by the way, and that there was a different organizational structure. They have abbots, and they own the monastery, and ora et labora, they work in their fields. It's quite different. With Francis, it was almost like Buddhist monks going around begging their daily sustenance from the lay people and not owning anything. So there were many changes which were all quite symbolic and therefore quite important. It is also likely that owing to his connections with Languedoc and with the south of France and with his mother, that some of these customs which he instituted had Cathar origins, because the Cathar perfectly did not own anything, and depended on the gift and the charity of their people and many other things. In any event, Francis purely with his life and his work and his organizing his monastic order, created a great and beneficent change in the church, and probably saved Catholicism from completely falling apart at that particular time. Now, maybe a little bit of implications. We have recited in the lesson the famous, which is often called the hymn, the song of St. Francis, where he speaks to the sun and the moon and the stars and the earth and the water and the fire, and this has also been preserved and has made a great impression. There were movies made about it, many paintings and things of that sort, but I always like to call attention, because it's just a matter of honesty, to keep in mind that when he speaks to the sun, when he speaks to the moon, the earth, and so forth, the water, the fire, he always ends up telling this particular element of nature to be thankful to the ultimate God. So St. Francis did not advocate a nature worship. He advocated the recognition that spiritual forces are in nature, and that ultimately they, like everything else, they come forth from the divinity. But if people were trying to make some kind of a neo-pagan out of St. Francis, are not referring really to the historical sources. Now, I think it, because of the folk custom of the blessing of the animals, and there has arisen a certain emphasis in connection with St. Francis about the relationship, say, of humans to animals. And that is also quite interesting and quite important. Francis obviously felt a relationship to the animal kingdom. But at the same time, like everybody else in his time, he recognized that animals and humans are different, and that it is incumbent upon us, to the extent that it is feasible and so, to be kindly and charitable toward the animals. You know, agricultural people, I grew up in the countryside in Hungary myself, agricultural people are often quite cruel to the animals. You know, they make the animal work, but the animal doesn't move fast enough. I don't say whether it's an ox or whether it's a horse or whatever. They beat them, you know, all kinds of things like that. And so Francis was trying to really teach and to promote a kindliness to animals as well as to humans. And that is certainly quite justified. Now, the relationship of humans to animals is a strange one. Dr. Annie Besant, Dr. Besant, where is your picture? Over there. You know, Annie Besant, who was the great leader of the Theosophical movement, was for so many years disciple of Madame Blavatsky. When she was dying in Adyar in her room, according to people who were there, at least one of whom I knew said that she kept repeating, "One thing I don't understand, why do the animals suffer so?" Because of, obviously, in the theosophical system where humans, we've all been bad boys and girls, and so it's our karma, right? That's why we suffer. Which to me was, I never really bought into that. I have known many of my theosophical friends, and karma has become a sort of substitute Jehovah for them, you know. This is how people get punished, the punishment principle. But animals, you can't say that the animals have any karma. And why do the animals suffer so? And certainly there's a great deal of pain and suffering and hunger and you know, all sorts of unpleasant experiences in the animal kingdom. Not only the unpleasant things that humans inflict on them, but nature inflicts it on them and other animals and so forth. And this is certainly it's a serious question. It's a conundrum. It's not such a serious question to the Gnostic, or at least the Gnostic feels that he has an answer to the serious question already, namely that we live in what Madame Blavatsky herself called a world of sorrow. It is a sorrowful universe. So the whole system of universal nature is put together in such a way that suffering and death are part of it. And you can train millions of medical doctors in our medical schools, and you can You can create millions of new vaccines, you know what? Sickness and death are going to still be here because they are part of the fabric of the universe. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't look out for ourselves and for our loved ones. But we need to recognize that, as Buddha, of course, very clearly and frequently has pointed out, that suffering is an existential state of existence. All that exists in some fashion or the other suffers. You might say, well, you know, I don't know, the vegetables don't suffer. But as Joseph Campbell pointed out once, to the great hilarity of some of us who were there, he said that there have been actual experiments conducted, actually it was by a professor in India, whereby sort of electric vibrations could be measured from vegetables. And so when the particular person went out in the vegetable garden and was pulling out carrots and things like that, these would emit sort of frightened little vibrations. And like Campbell said, they were virtually crying, "Oh no, don't take me, take him." You know? So let's say some rudimentary emotional responses, including fear and suffering, may be present in the vegetable kingdom as well. So these are things that need to be recognized. Now, for a couple of, maybe it was more than a couple of miserable years of my life, in my 20s, I was actually a vegetarian. I don't look back with any favor to the time. Not only was I always hungry, but I was also always sick. In other words, I was very much subject to influenzas and things like that. And so, let's say, the commendable desire not to bring further death and suffering into this world is without our ability of realization. No matter what you do, in some fashion you will be part of the universe where there is sorrow, where there is sadness, where there is suffering, and where there is death. Now, this may sound a little bit rough to say, but it's just and really humanity was and is much better off in cultural situations, such as in many respects the Middle Ages, for instance, were, when death was accepted as a reality. You look at these beautiful old pictures of the man with the what is it called? You know, cuts the wheat. And who comes to everybody, and everybody dies. So there was a recognition that death is part of life, and therefore it's going to happen to all of us sooner or later, you know. So that and while we are in it, two things: a factual acceptance and a spiritual reaching beyond the suffering and the death of the world are advisable. How do we reach beyond it? Well, in a materialistic culture, we think we do it materially. We turn out more and more medicines, and so on and so forth. And many of them are quite helpful. But ultimately, what we need to do is to reach beyond the physical. The physical suffering and death are not going to cease by physical means. They can't even be kept at bay for too long by purely physical means, which is maybe something that we need to recognize at the present time. But they can be overcome by reaching beyond them, by reaching into the spirit, by allowing our consciousness to enter the realm of reality wherein none of these things exist, and which is one of our several homes, shall we say. It's not that it's something entirely foreign to us. And if we do that, then we manage to work our way through these situations, and in the same way we recognize that the element of death and suffering, and often a violent death, which occurs, well, it occurs certainly in the human kingdom. If we just look at the millions and millions and millions of people who were exterminated in the 20th century alone, then we see how nice we are to each other. But let us say also the killing of animals for food is a part of life. Certainly it would be useful if that were accomplished in a humane manner. But it's here. It's always been here. One of my sad jokes is that if you want to listen to the great mantra of the universe, this is it. Munch, 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 munch. Everything is eating everything else. And if it stops doing that, it dies. You know? So these are strange things. But the Gnosis has insights into it which may help to understand them. But the important thing is that we understand these matters, continue living on the sorrowful planet, and do the best that we can, that we don't make it worse than it already is. Now this is not a very optimistic message. I'm sure that if I said that, you can change the world, and it's all going to be great, and there's not going to be any death, and there's not going to be any predatory things, sure, then I would be a liar. And anybody who promotes that is such. It's a wishful thought. And we have the capacity as humans to wish for better things. If we keep wishing, and if we reach out for spiritual things, then maybe at some level of reality our wish will come true. But not in the manner in which it is so often pursued. So let's say the example in the inspiration of the little friar from Assisi is still with us. And it also includes our relationship to the animal kingdom. But there too, we have to watch it a little bit, and I'll conclude on that. Chesterton in his book about Father Brown. Somebody asks Father Brown, do you like dogs? And he said, oh yes, I like dogs, or I like a dog, as long as he's not spelled G-O-D. In other words, we should not exalt and deify the pets. For one thing, most of them, and maybe not a boa constrictor or something like that, but most of them live much shorter lives than we do. And if we put, say, an excess of emotion upon the path, then the path is going to precede us to the other life, and we are going to try bitter tears. So there's a certain emotional restraint may be useful. At least that's what G.K. Chesterton thought, and I thought I'll convey it to you. So the influence of Francis, the sanctity and the power of the little friar from Assisi is still with us, and we are thankful for it, and it calls our attention to a multiplicity of issues, a multiplicity of realities, and if we attend to these, then maybe we are to some degree fulfilling his expectations for humanity. And so may the mystery of that which hangs twixt heaven and earth descend upon us and remain with us always. Amen.